Oh, well, good evening. It's been kind of an eventful day. Um, we've uh, we've had some adventures. I went to work today for a lady in town, a really nice lady, and got a bunch of things done for her at her house. Not a lot of things done. I shouldn't say that. Really, got a few things done. Her help isn't good, so there's only so much that she likes to help me with my chores wherever she can, and so it's kind of hard on her. She has to quit usually after a few hours, of working at something. And so, but still, we got the main things done that needed to be done. That's all. Um, we got the garbage out because tomorrow's garbage day in that part of town, and we got the recycling sorted out, and we got the facilities, the litter boxes for the cats all cleaned up, and we got some other things done too on the property. Got a umbrella set up outside and stuff like that for shade and so on if we ever get any summer. Anyway, there was something that I was thinking about just now, and I thought about this before too, and it has to do with human nature and how our modern system brings something out in human nature that isn't good. A lot of people will say, well, back in the old days, people were better. Really, I'm old enough that I can legitimately say I remember the old days, and that isn't true. People weren't better. Now, people aren't better now either. There's people who think that, well, people are better now. No, people aren't better now. Human nature hasn't changed. Human nature is the same now as it has been since the beginning of time. Um, our human nature hasn't changed. What makes us tick hasn't changed. The way we dress, the music we listen to, the kinds of places we live, the kinds of jobs we do, um, the attitudes we have about different things, about politics and about sex and about gender roles and all that stuff. Yes, those things change. About you know, about different races, about money, and so on. Those things all change over time, and they tend to kind of float around. Sometimes we come back around to something and we start to believe something again that we used to believe. Sometimes we go off in a completely different path. But our basic human nature stays the same. And I think one illustration of that is money and how we think about money, how we deal with money, especially how we deal with credit. And I think how we dealt with credit in the olden days compared to how we deal with credit now is a good illustration of that. Um, Now, you go back to my grandparents' day. My grandparents who were born in 1918, 1919, and who were young adults in the 1930s and 40s and 50s. And, they didn't have credit cards from major banks and things like that. They didn't have that. The banks wouldn't even deal with you. The banks wouldn't talk to you unless you were really wealthy. The banks didn't deal with peasants, which is pretty much what my grandparents were. My dad's parents, I'm talking about, although I'm sure my mother's parents would be similar. They were just working class people. But the thing is, my grandparents, when they bought their house, they bought it with a private loan from a local man. There was a local man who had money, and this was a way that they'd make money. Basically, they'd loan money to people to buy homes. They'd hold the mortgage on the house, and you had to pay that back with interest. My grandparents bought their house in 1942 for $1,200 with a private loan. $1,200 was a lot of money in 1942. And they bought it with a private loan. And they made the payments. And it was a local man they owed the money to. It was somebody they might meet on the street, you know. Um, Now, the same was true for groceries and so on. They didn't have supermarkets, and you couldn't go to a big supermarket, Loblaws store or whatever, or if you're in the States, a Safeway store or a Piggly Wiggly or whatever. Not those things did exist, but not in small towns like where I come from. They didn't. Um, those things existed in the 40s and stuff and 50s. There were supermarkets, but we didn't really have that in a small town back then. What you had was corner stores. You had the little corner store in your neighborhood, the grocery store, down the street. And every neighborhood had a corner store. And the thing is, that was a local person. That was somebody you would know. Your kids would go to school with their kids. You go to the same church. You would, you'd meet on the street at times and stuff. And when you left your house, if you walked in a certain direction, you walked past their store, and oftentimes they lived in the store. They had their residence in the back of the store, or above the store, or whatever, or beside the store. And so you, you were always in danger of running into those people. And so if you owed them money, it was a shameful thing. And the thing is, people talked too. People wouldn't hesitate to say, if you owed money and you didn't pay, you get to be known as a bum. You get to be known as a deadbeat. And then nobody would want to deal with you. Nobody would want to do business with you. Your word would be considered no good. Now, it wasn't because people were better back then than they are now. It's because the system we had back then shamed you into honesty. And also it made it impossible for you to function in your town if you got to be known as a bum or a deadbeat or whatever, so if you needed something for a meal, like say my grandmother, she needed a loaf of bread to make sandwiches for lunch in the morning or whatever, for school or whatever it was. She'd send one of the kids, my dad or one of my aunts or uncles, down to the corner store, buy a loaf of bread. Now, if she didn't have a nickel or the dime or whatever it cost for that loaf of bread, she would tell them, now, put it on the charge account. Tell so-and-so at the grocery store that we're going to charge that and that we'll be in on payday to pay it. Now, if they hadn't paid that bill, if they took that bread and they didn't pay that bill, that would be like stealing. It'd really be no different than if you went in and just took a loaf of bread off the shelf and walked out with it, and just stole it. So if they didn't pay that, well, that was a shameful thing. And word would get around too, and everybody would know that they didn't pay their bill, So, see, it kept you honest, it did. And let's face it, you're going to run into this person at church. You're going to run into them on the street. Your kids and their kids play together, Their kids may say something to your kids. Their kids may say, hey, your old man owes my old man money for food, and he's never paid it, or something. I heard my dad talking about that, and he said that your dad owes him money, or whatever. So it kept you honest, because it was a shameful thing to be a deadbeat or a bum or whatever. Nowadays, people deal with huge, faceless, nameless corporations. If you deal with a person at all, you're just dealing with an employee, and the employee gets his wages whether you pay your bill or not. And you're borrowing from a huge bank. And the attitude generally is, if I don't pay my bill, well, they can afford to lose that money more than I can afford to pay it. So, tough for them, basically. And that's probably true. The way the banking system is set up, they're loaning people money that they don't even have. They can loan, I think it's up to 10 times what they actually have, to people. So basically, they can loan you money that doesn't exist and charge you interest on it. So they probably can afford to take the loss. They can definitely afford to take it more than the corner grocer could afford to take it, 70, 80, 90 years ago. Um, and so it's what's happened is a different attitude has been fostered because everything now is very impersonal, everything's very corporate. Um, you're not dealing with somebody who has a personal stake like you in the situation like you are, say, if you're dealing with the corner grocer or the corner mechanic or the corner hardware store man or whatever. And generally you're dealing over the phone or something. You're dealing with somebody you never see. In fact, a lot of the time you're dealing with somebody working in a boiler room, like a sweatshop over in some foreign country like India. you know so I mean, that's the whole thing. It changes people's attitude toward things. I'm going to tell you a story now that I remember. It's a story that kind of touches me because a friend of mine kind of put his head on the chopping block for me. And I'll never forget it, that this fella did this for me. I in the late 1980s, for a while, I did relief custodial work for the separate school board around here. The separate school board is the Catholic school board. In those days, it was called the separate school board because it was separate from the public school board. Anyway, I did custodial work. I got sent wherever I was needed. If a custodian was off sick or away on vacation or on some kind of leave, or if a job opened up and it hadn't been filled yet, because with the union, they had a very strong union, and there was a whole thing they had to go through to fill a vacant position. They had to advertise it internally, and then if nobody wanted it, it was already employed there, then they had to advertise it outside, and so on. And so sometimes I had to do a lot of driving to get to work because it was a big area. The furthest I ever had to drive was to a place called Prescott, a town called Prescott. I had to go from Perth to Prescott, and that was a long drive. And I had to leave my apartment in Perth above the Royal Bank. I just moved in there at the time. I was 20 years old. I had to leave there, and this was in 1988. I had to leave there at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had to, because I had to have all the garbage out and everything from the school. I had to have it outside by 5. And it would take me like an hour and a half to drive to work. So it'd be, if I left at 2 in the morning, it'd be 3:30 before I actually got to the school. Then I had to, of course, sweep all the floors. I had to get the garbage all together, get the garbage out, and all that. So it'd be 4:30, 5 o'clock before I'd have the garbage out, basically for the. Oh, I think I told the story about the old guy that used to come and get the garbage. He was a real miserable outfit, and he ended up being mixed up in a child sex abuse ring. So I tell that story in another video anyway. But anyway, getting back to what I was talking about with paying bills and about things being personal and so on, there was a service station in Perth called Donaldson Shell Station. And a friend of mine worked in there. And I got called up to go to Prescott to work. And this was a job that was going to last for a few months because they was where they had to fill a position because the position had become vacant. It was going to take a few months to fill this position anyway. And I had no money. I was broke. And the school board would make you wait a month. When you started a new job, you had to wait a full month before you got your first paycheck. So I had to drive to Prescott and back for a month with no gasoline. Well, I went to see my friend at Donaldson Shell because I knew that they let people run tabs there. There were people who had charge accounts there where it was just a personal charge account with the business. And I asked my friend if I could run an account. I told him the story, and he said, "No problem, Tom. Just come in and pay it when you're able to. That's all." And so I filled my car up. In those days, it was like a $20 to fill the car up, but that's a lot of money when you don't have it. And for a month, I filled my car up once a week, and I put it on my charge account. And when I got my first paycheck, the first thing I did is I went to the bank and cashed my check. In those days, we did everything with cash pretty much, you know. I got the cash, and the first place I stopped was at Donaldson Shell Station to pay my bill because I knew that my friend had put his neck on the line for me. And when I was in there paying my bill, the owner came in. And my friend, he says to the owner, he says, "Tom's here to pay his bill. See, I told you he would pay. I told you." And his employer there, the owner of the service station, he says, "Yeah." Well, he said, "It's a damn good thing." He said, "Yeah," he said, "it's a damn good thing for you that he does pay." It's like that. And then he turned around and walked out. And I said to him, I said, "Has he been giving you a hard time because you let me charge here?" And he, well, yeah, he said, "but don't worry about it, you know." But see, if I hadn't paid that bill, you know, my friend might have lost his job. He might have been made to pay all the money that I owed out of his own pocket. Who knows what might have happened there. And so, see, he put his neck on the line for me. And I was grateful to him. And I paid my bill. And there was never any question that I would pay it. But for a solid month, you know, he had his boss breathing down his neck because he had allowed me to open a charge account there. So, I mean, now they let other people do it too, but they didn't really want to let some, maybe because I was a young guy or something. They were not sure how responsible I'd be. I don't know, but I know that it caused some issues anyway between him and his boss, the fact that he let me do that. And see, that's what I'm saying. That's a personal thing. You can put a face to the situation there. My friend, you know, because he let me charge the fuel to run my car. I had a 1979 Buick LeSabre Limited sedan at the time, and he let me get the fuel to run that car for a solid month. You know, so I could go to work and earn a living. And that, you know, I never forgot that he did that for me anyway. And the bottom line is, there was no question I was going to pay that bill because I wasn't going to leave him looking like a fool, you know, and leave him with his boss mad at him and leave him probably having to pay my debt back or losing his job or whatever. And that's what I'm saying. See, and that's like the old system. That's just like how it used to be with credit and everything, where you knew the people you owed money, you know, and it made you act differently. It wasn't that people were naturally better. It's that people, it was a personal thing. It was a very personal thing. And that, I think, kept people honest, you know. Anyway, like I say, human nature hasn't changed, though. We're just the same as we've always been. It's just the more impersonal you make a thing, well, just it brings something out that isn't particularly good in people, you know. And we see that more and more all the time in society. You know, people don't know their neighbors. People don't know or understand the people around them, really, and they don't want to. And it's affecting us in various ways, you know. And even social media has brought us together like we've never been brought together before. But it's also created a lot of foolishness and phoniness, and a lot of people, mad at each people. They don't know the other person, and they're furious with them because somebody took an opposing stand, or an opposing point of view to them, and they take it personally. It's far harder to hate somebody for disagreeing with you if you know beforehand who they are as a person. But if they're just some stranger on the internet, then it's very easy to look at that person and just on the basis of one thing where they've taken an opposing point of view, say, well, this person is my enemy. And we see that a lot now on social media. And so the impersonal nature of things these days is kind of feeding the less savory parts of our nature as human beings. Whereas the fact that things were as personal as they were years ago, that actually fed the better parts of who we are. It forced us to hold ourselves to a higher standard. The community held you to a higher standard. You hold yourself to a higher standard, because you'd have to look that guy that you owed money to in the eye, and you knew you were causing him hardship. Like, if I hadn't paid my bill at the service station, I'd have caused my friend all sorts of trouble. As it stands, my friend did have trouble. Just for allowing me to do that, he had trouble. Now imagine if I hadn't paid my bill. How could I? If I met that guy on the street today, I'd shake his hand and I'd look him in the eye and I'd say, "How you doing? Good to see you again." I couldn't do that if I hadn't paid that bill. I'd have to hang my head in shame. I'd cross the street to avoid seeing that fellow. I'd just hang my head in shame. I'd be embarrassed. So yeah, anyway, and that's the whole thing, So yeah, anyway, that's the bottom line. This thing that I got my soda pop in is making some noises like it wants to. The pressure's building up in it, and it might want to blow up or something. There we go. All right. Anyway, when it starts hissing like that, I release the lid, let the pressure off it, because it's just a mason jar, basically, is all it is, Anyway, that's the bottom line. Just something that I thought of anyway, and I think that story about, how I needed fuel to go to work, and how my friend allowed me to charge the fuel at the service station where he worked until I got my first paycheck. I think that pretty well illustrates what I'm trying to say anyway. But, yeah. All right. We'll talk to you later. First, we have to see Rocky. There he is. He's asleep on his coat. He is. I've opened up a few of these things here, these heat things that go in there, and I got them laying on top of me under the covers here to keep me warm, because it's cold in here and damp in here tonight again. I'm going to work tomorrow, so there's that too. Looking forward to getting back to work again. Yeah, anyway, I'm going to work at the neighbors over here. I am. So, there's always lots of work to do there. One of the things I'm going to be doing is moving a chipmunk nest. I guess they got a chipmunk nest in one of their gardens, and it needs to be moved. And so we're going to try to move it with as little disruption as possible, and find a better spot for it anyway, so that the chipmunk can live its life in peace and harmony, basically, and not be in the way and not be in any danger. All right, we'll talk to you later.